We know that there's a great deal of worth and value in some of that data, but the problem is unstructured data doesn't lend itself easily to customers being able to find that value in the data because by its very nature of being disorganized and aggregate, it's difficult for businesses to actually recognize the patterns and trends that are necessary to help them move their business in the right direction. So how does that create the challenge for business and particularly for IT? Again, we know that when the data is growing so dramatically, both in terms of people and in terms of dollars for infrastructure, those things aren't keeping up, which means that customers are needing to be much smarter about both how they store data, how they administer that data, and how they respond to the needs of that data. We also see that the infrastructure itself has often not able to keep up with this dramatic growth of data and capacity because the solutions that have been developed historically really didn't plan on having such a dramatic increased data set. So, what would a more perfect solution look like? How would customers be more effectively able to capture and utilize unstructured data? First, that solution would need to be massively scalable. It would need to be able to be cloud-enabled, so both running in private data centers and public clouds and communicating between them, so hybrid cloud solutions. And all of the reporting, all of the analytics, all of the information that would allow businesses to get insights would need to either be built in directly and, more importantly, also customizable through APIs. Obviously, in order for those solutions to work, we would need them to be easier to manage, low touch, and of course, we consider it merely table stakes at evolving solutions, that those solutions would also need to be very redundant and make it possible for you to move your data from place to place. So today, as Dan Wilkie explained earlier, we'll be talking about Qumulo. What is Qumulo? Qumulo is a node-based, distributed, scalable system that understands the data that is ingested, and is capable of both absorbing and presenting those huge amounts of data across multiple protocols. So what do I mean when I say that? So first, it's a grid, a node-based grid. That means that rather than adding a drive or a shelf of drives, I actually add complete nodes. Every node contains compute, memory, network, and storage. Those nodes are all equal to each other. That means that there's no single point of failure for administration or for storage. Every time I add a node to the environment, not only does capacity improve, but performance and throughput improve as well. I have the ability to have Qumulo environments in the cloud and on-prem, and that the way those function is essentially the same. I get real-time analytics out of that, and that becomes very important when I'm attempting to locate data or protect data or report on that data so that I don't have to constantly crawl the file system. That means that my reporting happens very, very quickly. I can scale them to literally billions of files and handle very small files and very large files, and I can access that through multiple protocols, Microsoft's SMB and CIFS, NFS, FTP, and a RESTful API. Dan, do we want to let people ask questions now, or would we prefer people to save them until the end of the presentation?
We'll go ahead and save the questions to the end. Thanks, Dan.
Outstanding. So, in order to understand Qumulo, I think it's necessary to take just a few seconds to talk about what we see as the evolution of network-attached storage. So when NAS first came out, very often it was really storage, whether that was an entry-level NAS or a JBOD that was directly attached to existing compute nodes or environments. A couple of problems with that: it didn't scale very well. It became difficult to manage because, as opposed to being one larger homogeneous environment, I had little pockets all over the place. That meant that I couldn't realize cost savings of economy of scales, and it obviously didn't help or enable cloud at all. Enterprise NAS started when the industry began to produce scalable solutions. Those scalable solutions tended to be solutions with customized management, and then I could add storage behind them. The difficulty in those is that they could only grow to a certain point, and as they began to grow, I began to see, or we begin to realize, a lack of performance, because even if there's enough capacity on the back end, eventually the controllers, the management models, begin to become the bottleneck. We regularly saw that those solutions became very, very expensive, and they still didn't provide the kind of reporting and insight into what data lived on them, nor did they do cloud or cloud native things. The next evolution brought us a little closer to where we wanted to be, what we think of as scale out or horizontal scaling NAS. The problem with those still is that almost always they used proprietary hardware, and because the original scale out models were often developed around very large files, they didn't necessarily use storage effectively as general purpose NASs. Very often, particularly in unstructured data, we see heterogeneous files. We see everything from very, very small thumbnail GIFs all the way on up through massive multimedia. So a lot of these legacy scale-out NASs didn't use storage terribly well. And again, they didn't necessarily report because they weren't always data aware and they weren't cloud native. So what makes Qumulo different is that Qumulo was developed and designed from the ground up in order to address all of these problems. It scales easily. It's enterprise reliable. Analytics are built right in. So as files are ingested, metadata is created on them. So rather than having to crawl a file system later, all of the information about what resides on a Qumulo grid is readily available. It's meant to be administered from a web interface or from an API. And as I've said before, I can have Qumulo both on-prem and in the cloud, and I can have Qumulo communicate into the cloud. Qumulo already exists in all of these environments. So everything from image capture and facial recognition through healthcare diagnostic imaging, up through education and government, through regular, what we think of as general purpose file data, including things that are heavy in analytics like e-discovery, all the way up through machine learning databases, fraud detection, and behaviors like that. I mention that fact so that you'll understand that the same platform can be used from everything from very, very large streaming files like rich media, all the way through general purpose, all the way to very small files and analytic behavior. Speaking of analytics, Qumulo makes it very possible not just to see how much data you have, but what kind of data you have, how it's used, where it's used, what kind of data sets. If we see that certain kinds of data are being accessed over and over again, it recognizes that and can both cache that in higher performing, or give you some insight into how you might need to scale out the grid. All of these analytics make it very, very possible to do auditing and things like that. However, one of the most important things is, please feel free to laugh later, I've coined the term pseudo-structuralization. What I mean by that is that if we recognize that unstructured data has a lot of value, but we don't necessarily know how to extract the value, One of the strengths of Qumulo is the ability, instead of changing how we store the data, instead of attempting to wrap discipline around the acquisition of that data, we can use the native Qumulo tools or API scripts against the Qumulo grid and wrap discipline around what it is we want to see inside the grid. So rather than having to change how you structure the data or move the data from place to place, we can apply structure to how you look at your data, giving your business the ability to treat unstructured data as though it was structured data. So a little bit about the way Qumulo works. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Every node is equal. All the nodes communicate across a common Ethernet backplane, and they communicate across an IP space with end users. All data lives and lands first on flash and then can be destaged from flash to disk. This gives you the ability to have flash performance without necessarily having to have the cost of flash. And we see that because the nodes all cooperate and participate simultaneously, rebuilds occur very, very quickly, and data protection occurs as the files are ingested. Scaling a Qumulo grid, adding capacity and performance is very, very easy. You can literally add another node in minutes. Once that environment is racked and connected up, the grid can detect new members. Those new nodes can be utilized immediately, and any rebalancing of data to smooth out the performance and capacity utilization of the grid happens in the background while you are still using the grid in real time. We also want to talk about the fact that, as I said earlier, Qumulo works both on-prem and in the cloud. Today, Qumulo can be used in both Amazon and in Google, and Azure is coming. So you can build a grid, a Qumulo grid, in the cloud. That's not just a DR location. You can actually do enterprise business in the cloud. So I have the ability in a Qumulo environment to both use Qumulo for replication for disaster recovery, but I can also now move workloads closer to my customers. I'm no longer constrained by the limits of where my physical data centers are. If I want to be able to move the workload closer to a region where my customers are or an online, I can actually put a Qumulo grid there, and that allows me to become more free of the constraints of locality. On top of that, we're seeing more and more people, more and more customers in business doing workload in the cloud itself, utilizing native cloud tools. And to that end, they regularly access that data through S3 repositories. Qumulo Shift is capable of taking data in any given Qumulo directory and copying that. That is not a tier, that is not an archive tier of Qumulo. It is an engine built into Qumulo that makes it possible to copy data out from the Qumulo grid into an S3 repository. So if your workload is already existing in the cloud, so for things such as translations, image recognition, large data set, analytic behavior in the cloud, Qumulo supports the ability to do that as well. So what does that mean to you? I realize this slide might be a little busy, but what it really attempts to show is that regardless of whether you are working on-prem or whether you are accessing your workload remotely in the cloud, I have the ability to create an on-prem experience, and I can either copy that on-prem experience up into the cloud, or I can move on-prem data and extend that out into S3 repositories so that I have the ability to have identical behaviored workloads both locally and in the cloud, which allows me to turn my existing environments into cloud-ready or cloud-native environments. Would now be a good time for questions, Dan?
Sure. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, go ahead and you feel free to unmute or put them in the chat box.
How is this product priced roughly? I mean, is it per terabyte, per node? What's your pricing model?
Sure, I'm going to kick that one over to Phil Schumacher to answer.
Yeah, great question. So we're so it's transferable between on-prem and cloud systems. So if we're giving you investment protection. If you want to go 400 terabytes or a couple petabytes on-prem, and then you want to put half of that in the cloud or all of it in the cloud, you don't have to rebuy that licensing. And it's
but we would have to pay S3 or we'd have to pay Amazon for the S3 storage, right? Or do you bill that as well?
Correct. Yes. So what you're paying for on the Qumulo licensing is the software, is the data management aspect, and either on-prem, an x86 node-based architecture, right, on-prem, or S3 in the cloud.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks for the question, Tom. Well, I'm not seeing any questions coming in the chat. So Ted, if you go ahead and advance the slide. All right, so thank you again for everyone's attendance this morning. Obviously, we breezed through that really fast. Our intention was just to, provide a little bit of insight into what we're seeing in the industry as it relates to unstructured data, and provide you a teaser around Qumulo. Of course, we would expect to have a much deeper conversation for anyone that's interested in going a little bit deeper into how what your unstructured data needs and challenges are in your environment, and we'd welcome the opportunity to have that conversation. So feel free to reach out to me or directly to Ted, and we'd love to have that conversation with you. As far as the event for this afternoon, we'll be gathering at 88 Tactical off of Highway 370 and I-80 around 3:20. We'll get everybody checked in. You are welcome to bring your own firearm if you wish. Otherwise, we will be providing a rental firearm for those that choose not to or do not have their own firearm to bring. Although please note that due to the ammo shortage, we have only been able to secure 9mm ammo. So if you are bringing your own firearm and it's not 9mm, you will have to source your own ammo. We'll kick things off at 3:30 with a brief firearm introduction class, just kind of make sure everybody's got a good baseline, giving that we'll have a variety of people with a variety of different backgrounds and familiarity with firearms, and then we'll head up to the range, and we'll get some good range time in, and hopefully have a friendly competition near the end of that as well. Around 4:30, we'll go ahead and check the firearms in and head over to the Founders Club, where we'll have some networking over appetizers and some beverages. I don't know if masks will be required, but I would be prepared with them just in case at your discretion. So that wraps it up for today. I'm looking forward to seeing everyone at the range this afternoon, and I appreciate your attendance.